Thousands of Georgians protested the foreign agent bill of the government. Finally, the government revoked the bill, but Russia accused all of the protesters of being spies of the Western countries.
Hello dear people, today we are going to talk about the recent protests in Georgia and the attitudes of Russia.
The Georgian Dream Party has approved a draft bill containing two laws on the transparency of foreign influence and the registration of foreign agents. Later, Georgia's parliament has rejected a controversial bill that critics argued that it would have curtailed freedom of the press and violated the human rights. Lawmakers voted 35-1 against the proposed foreign agents legislation, which the ruling Georgian Dream Party claimed it would have brought a minimum level of transparency and accountability to non-profit organizations. The incidents happened following widespread opposition and accusations of copying Russia's laws on the same subject. Since the first reading of the draft law was passed by Parliament, tens of thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of Tbilisi in opposition to the proposed bill. The demonstrators argued that the legislation could provide the government with the authority to label the critics as foreign agents. Human rights defender Nikusha Parulova stated that it is crucial to resist Russian law at this stage, as we know how the dictatorship was established in Russia and then in Belarus. With such laws, freedom is entirely eradicated.
Parulova joined the protest on their first day and witnessed how police is turning against their own citizens.
The authorities used water cannons and tear gas, and over 100 people were arrested. She also said during the unlawful arrest, the police and special forces assaulted the protesters. If the legislation is enacted, non-governmental organizations, including media outlets and charities that receive more than 20% of their funding from foreign sources, would be required to register as foreign agents of influence.
Non-compliance can result in fines or even imprisonment. On the other side, the American embassy in Georgia made an announcement.
The US Embassy in Georgia said, "The passing of this bill marks a dark day for Georgia's democracy. Parliament's endorsement of these laws, inspired by the Kremlin, is contradictory to Georgia's expressed desire for European integration and democratic progress." The embassy further remarked, "Enacting these laws will harm Georgia's relations with strategic partners and undermine the important work of many Georgian organizations that are committed to assisting their fellow citizens."
After a wave of public backlash, Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili defended the legislation.
However, in a surprising turn of events, Georgian lawmakers have voted to abandon the controversial foreign agents bill modeled after Russia's legislation. The parliament voted on the second reading of the draft one day after the ruling Georgian Dream Party announced the withdrawal of the proposed legislation in response to the protest.
Anti-Russian sentiment is always an important and strong issue in Georgia.
Russian troops still occupy roughly one-fifth of Georgia's territories, much of it taken during a sweet war in 2008 that aimed to suppress separatist activities in the two northeastern regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. While the Georgian Dream Party's announcement of the bill's unconditional withdrawal helped de-escalate the present crisis, tensions are likely to persist between the ruling party and opposition over their distinct visions for the heavily divided Caucasus country and its nearly 5 million inhabitants. The opposition has always criticized the Georgian Dream Party for being too closely aligned with Moscow and heightened concerns over the Kremlin's present war against Ukraine.
Also, French President Macron spoke about the pressure which Georgia is facing currently.
French President Macron spoke about the pressure which Georgia is facing, and he expressed hope that the country could find a path towards greater unity as well as a calming down of regional tensions. During a joint news conference with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in Paris, Macron dismissed Russian claims that protests in the Caucasus country were orchestrated by the West. The Russian government has accused foreign countries of instigating the recent mass protests in Georgia, labeling them a coup attempt aimed at creating tension on the Russian borders. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov claimed that the protests were orchestrated from abroad, using the Georgian government's proposed legislation on NGOs as an excuse to initiate a violent overthrow of the government. The Kremlin criticized Georgia's president for making anti-Russian remarks, suggesting a third party was stoking tensions in the country.
The bill proposed by the Georgian Dream Party is totally similar to the legislation passed in Russia in 2012.
The Russian law was later amended in 2019 to target journalists and bloggers, and again 2020 to include any individual with the intent of suppressing civil society. The moves have been criticized by human rights organizations such as Human Rights Watch as an attempt to suppress independent voices in Russia.
The relationship between Russia and Georgia has been tense since the 2008 Russian-Georgian War.
In recent years, Georgia has sought closer ties with the West and applied for EU membership in 2020. But the EU declined to provide Georgia candidate status in 2021, citing concerns over the country's democratic backsliding.
The ruling Georgian Dream Party, founded by a businessman having ties with Russia, is always accused of having close ties with Moscow.
The party has also been criticized for its handling of the recent Foreign Agents Bill, which sparked big protest, and it was withdrawn after the ruling party announced it was pulling the proposed legislation.
While Georgia initially condemned the Russian invasion in Ukraine and sent humanitarian aid, it refused to join the sanctions made by the Western countries against Russia.
The government has also been criticized for barring a chartered plane from transporting volunteer fighters to Ukraine and for its handling of imprisoned former President Mikhail Saakashvili, who is now a Ukrainian citizen and has accused the Georgian government of trying to kill him.
Mikhail Saakashvili came to power in Georgia's Rose Revolution in 2004 and he served until 2013.
He presided over Russia's invasion of the country in 2008. He later took a political position in Ukraine, serving as governor of Odessa. He was convicted of abuse of power in absentia and was then arrested after making a surprise return to Georgia in 2021. He has lost weight and his health worsened since he was jailed in October that year. An organization supporting victims of torture in Georgia alleged in December that Saakashvili had been diagnosed with illnesses incompatible with imprisonment. Also, Georgian and foreign medical experts found evidence of heavy metal poisoning.
And this is time to share your opinions.